On Thanksgiving Day, I arrived at my daughter's house unannounced and saw my grandson shivering outside in the bitterly cold 15 weather, wearing only a thin t-shirt and shorts. Inside, the entire family was comfortably sitting at the holiday table, enjoying their large turkey and laughing in the comforting warmth. Consumed by their utter betrayal, I violently slammed open the entryway and loudly spoke 6 stern words that instantly made their shocked faces turn completely white. But that was truly only the beginning of the inevitable justice that ultimately changed their dysfunctional lives forever. Before we continue, I urge you to please subscribe to this channel and kindly share in the comments section what local time it happens to be where you currently reside. My phone urgently buzzed against the dashboard. A short text message from my kind neighbor arrived. I spotted police vehicles over at the Hendersons' house once more. Clearly another domestic disturbance. This sight immediately brought to mind all the pressing anxieties concerning you and your family. I stared intently at those upsetting words while my vintage blue Chevrolet idled silently in the driveway. The Hendersons. Martha used to worry constantly about their troubled grandson, too. Back when she was still alive to worry about anything at all. Now it was just me and that annoying, horrible feeling in my gut whenever I thought about Leona's disastrous second marriage. The clock read 2:30 p.m. time for me to go. I shifted the car into reverse and backed out onto Miller Street. Heavy snow had started falling an hour ago. Fat, wet flakes that stuck tenaciously to everything and made the roads truly treacherous. The radio crackled harshly with urgent weather warnings as I turned onto I-75 south toward Cincinnati. My familiar classical rock station played, the same one Martha and I always listened to together. LED Zeppelin was playing something heavy and mournful that perfectly matched my somber mood. The passenger seat held 2 carefully chosen gift bags, one with a new, genuine, high-quality leather baseball glove for Amos, which regrettably cost me substantially more money than I had initially intended to spend. The other bag had several favorite comic books, the kind with powerful superheroes he'd been reading avidly since he was 12 years old. Now 18, he'd probably mistakenly thought he was far too old for them. But I distinctly remembered being 18. You are never truly too old for heroes. Family is all we have left, Martha used to softly say when she'd catch me grumbling about mandatory holiday visits. She'd been absolutely right then, and she was right now, even though her comforting voice only existed in my memory now. After losing her 6 long months ago, every family gathering felt incredibly precious and deeply fragile. The windshield wipers struggled valiantly against the accumulating, thick snow. Other cars crawled along slowly at half the posted speed limit, hazard lights blinking rapidly like nervous fireflies. I kept both hands firmly on the wheel and maintained a steady, careful 40 miles per hour. No point arriving at all if I ended up in a deep ditch. Exit signs counted down the rapidly dwindling miles to Cincinnati. I tried urgently calling Leona's house. Wanted to let them know I was coming and maybe surprise them less dramatically than just showing up uninvited. The phone rang 6 times before immediately going to voicemail. Strange. Usually someone was always home on Thanksgiving afternoon. A large gas station appeared suddenly through the dense snow. Bright, cold fluorescent lights cutting sharply through the gray afternoon like a guiding lighthouse. I pulled in, filled the large tank, and went inside to grab some hot coffee and a bag of those delightful peppermint candies Amos specifically liked. The clerk, a young, exhausted guy with tired eyes, shook his head sadly at the worsening weather. "Roads are getting worse by the hour," he said, scanning my items. "You driving far?" "Just to Cincinnati for a big family dinner." "Be careful out there." Saw 3 major accidents already today. Back in the truck, I checked the time once again. 3:05 p.m. The drive usually quickly took 45 minutes. But today it would clearly be closer to an hour. I thought about Amos probably diligently helping his mother in the kitchen, maybe lazily watching football with Wilbur. The boy had grown so much since the past summer when we went fishing at Lake Erie. Caught his first bass that great day. Grinned widely like he'd won the lottery jackpot. That's when I'd first noticed the ugly bruise on his arm. When I nervously asked about it, he'd suddenly gotten quiet, said something vague about falling off his bike, but the mark looked wrong to me. Too precise, too much like clear finger marks. I should have pressed him harder, should have definitely asked more uncomfortable questions. Martha would have known exactly what to do. The snow kept falling steadily as I took exit 15 toward Leona's exclusive neighborhood. Suburban streets were neatly lined with two-story houses, each one cheerfully decorated with pumpkins and festive autumn wreaths. Christmas lights were already starting to go up on some of them, twinkling brightly through the white curtain of snow. I turned slowly into Maple Grove subdivision, driving cautiously past houses where happy families were probably gathered around dining tables, sharing stories and passing platters of delicious dishes. Warm, inviting light spilled from the windows, creating golden rectangles on the immaculate snow-covered lawns. This was supposed to be a very good day, a deeply healing day. Martha would have truly wanted that for us. Leona's street appeared ahead, and I could clearly see her house at the very end of the block. The recognizable blue two-story with white shutters, Wilbur's dark pickup idling in the driveway next to her family sedan. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and bright holiday decorations covered the front porch. Everything looked completely normal, peaceful even. I slowed the truck as I approached, already imagining the shock and surprise on their faces when I finally knocked on the door. Maybe Amos would quickly run to hug me like he used to do when he was smaller. Maybe this Thanksgiving would genuinely be the start of healing our broken family, the specific way Martha always earnestly dreamed it could be. I pulled into the driveway directly behind Wilbur's truck, the engine ticking loudly as it cooled. Through the falling snow, I could see holiday lights twinkling around the front door and hear faint, cheerful music from inside the house. Something warm and inviting, like a genuine Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Then I saw him clearly. Amos sat forlornly on the front steps, hunched over with his arms tightly wrapped around his knees. No heavy coat, no winter hat, just a thin, long-sleeved shirt and jeans, already lightly dusted with snow. His young shoulders shook visibly, not just from the brutal cold, but from something far deeper. Jesus Christ, I muttered angrily, throwing open the truck door. The biting wind hit me like a physical slap, carrying sharp ice crystals that stung my face painfully. In the few short seconds it took me to urgently reach him, I could see his pale lips had turned blue, and his hands were pressed tight against his body, desperately trying to conserve warmth. Amos, I loudly called out, breaking into a frantic run across the slippery driveway. What in God's name are you doing out here? He looked up slowly, and the immediate relief in his eyes nearly broke my heart into pieces. His face was starkly pale, almost gray, with severe red patches on his cheeks where the cold had bitten deepest. Grandpa? His voice came out as barely a feeble whisper, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form the words. I can't. I was already quickly pulling off my heavy winter coat, wrapping it securely around his shaking shoulders, before he could finish the heartbreaking sentence. The poor boy was ice cold, his whole body trembling violently like a leaf caught in a hurricane. What do you mean you can't? Can't what? I gently helped him stand up, instantly steadying him when his weak legs nearly buckled. How long have you been sitting out here? I'm not allowed. He pulled my coat tighter around himself, and I could clearly feel him shaking through the thick fabric. I'm not allowed to go in the house. The awful words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Behind us, through the brightly lit windows, I could distinctly hear laughter and the loud sound of a television. The warm, deceptive glow of a family celebration while my beloved grandson sat freezing on the front steps like some kind of despicable punishment. What do you mean? Not allowed. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but sheer anger was quickly building in my chest like a roaring fire. This is your home. Amos flinched visibly at my harsh tone, and I immediately softened it. The last thing he desperately needed was another adult yelling at him. Please don't make it worse for me, he tearfully whispered, glancing nervously at the front door. Please, Grandpa, if Wilbur hears you ... I looked intently at the house, really looked at it closely. The festive decorations, the warm lights, the comforting sounds of celebration. Then I looked at my beloved grandson, blue-lipped and shivering uncontrollably in clothes that wouldn't keep him comfortably warm in. 50 weather, let alone this near-freezing nightmare. How long, Amos? I kept my voice gentle but undeniably firm. How long have you been out here? He wouldn't meet my direct eyes. Since this morning. This morning? I quickly checked my watch. 2:45? Son, it's below freezing out here. You could get severe frostbite. You could. I stopped myself abruptly before I scared him worse than he already was. I tried the solid front door handle. Locked. Of course, it was definitely locked. They locked him out of his very own home on Thanksgiving Day, and left him to freeze while they happily enjoyed their holiday dinner. We need to get you warm, I said, quickly guiding him toward my waiting truck. Come on, let's get you in the cab, where there's maximum heat. But even as I moved quickly to protect him, my mind was working, carefully cataloging details. The way he'd suddenly flinched when I raised my voice, the faint bruises I'd first noticed during our fishing trip, the careful way he moved like someone who'd learned to make himself small and totally invisible. This wasn't the first time this abuse had happened. This was clearly a disturbing pattern. Amos, I said as I helped him into the passenger seat and quickly turned the heat to maximum setting. I need you to tell me exactly what horrific event today. I cranked the heat to full blast and wrapped another heavy blanket from my emergency kit securely around Amos' shoulders. His small hands were so numb he couldn't grip anything properly, so I held them gently between mine, trying to rub warmth back into his icy fingers. Talk to me, son, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the surging rage building in my chest. What happened this morning? He stared down at his hands, still uncontrollably shaking. I was helping Mom with the main turkey. She asked me to quickly check on it while she took a shower. His voice was small, filled with shame. I forgot to turn off the oven timer when I took it out to baste it. You forgot a timer? The turkey got a little burnt on top. Not completely ruined, just darker than usual. He finally looked at me directly, and I could see the deep fear in his eyes. Wilbur came in and saw it, and he lost it. I felt my jaw clench hard. Lost it how? Started immediately yelling about how I'd totally ruined the whole holiday. Said the guests would think Mom couldn't cook. That I was an utter embarrassment to the entire family. Amos pulled the heavy blanket tighter. Then he said I needed to think seriously about my actions and that I couldn't come back inside until I'd learned some responsibility. And your mother? The question came out harder than I intended. Amos looked quickly away. She tried to say something helpful at first, but Wilbur told her abruptly to stay out of it. Said this was strictly between him and me. He swallowed hard. She didn't say anything after that. I checked my watch again. 3:20. Amos, what time did this happen? Around 11 this morning. 4.5 hours. 4.5 grueling hours in weather that could genuinely kill someone over a slightly burnt turkey that probably tasted just fine. I had to take several extremely deep breaths before I could speak without intensely shouting. Has this happened before? The question hung heavily in the air between us. I could see him wrestling internally with whether to tell me the complete truth, probably weighing the severe consequences of honesty against the immense relief of finally having someone to tell. Sometimes, he whispered, when I mess up. Last month, he made me stand in the garage all night long because I forgot to quickly take out the trash. And once he locked me in the dark basement for 2 whole days because I accidentally broke one of his precious beer bottles. Each word felt like a sharp punch to my gut. I looked at my grandson, this smart, undeniably kind boy who'd never deliberately hurt anyone in his life, and saw the careful way he held himself, like someone who'd learned that taking up too much physical space could be dangerous. Your mother knows about this. She says Wilbur's just trying to teach me basic discipline, that I need to be more responsible. His voice cracked painfully. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just ... Don't. I turned in the seat to fully face him. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. What that vicious man is doing to you isn't discipline. It's blatant, systematic abuse, and it's going to stop today. Amos' eyes went wide with sheer panic. No, Grandpa, please. If you make a massive scene, he'll just take it out on me later. He always does. The silence in the truck felt heavier than the snow falling outside, a silence born of pain and unspoken truth. I could still see the house through the windshield, still glowing warm and invitingly, still full of laughter and cheerful holiday music. Inside, my daughter was casually serving dinner to guests while her husband's stepson sat, literally freezing in a truck, too terrified to ask for basic human decency. Listen to me very carefully, I said, taking his cold hands again. You are 18 years old now. You don't have to live like this anymore, and I'm certainly not going to let you. But where would I go? I don't have any money at all. I can't afford college without. You'll come home with me tonight. The sudden decision crystallized as I spoke the firm words. We'll figure out the rest later. I could see the intense hope and overwhelming terror warring intensely in his expression. Hope, because maybe finally someone was going to actually stand up for him. Terror, because he'd learned not to trust that things could actually suddenly get better. He won't let me leave, Amos said quietly. He'll call the police immediately. Say I stole something important. Or that you're kidnapping me. I looked at the house again, at the warm lights and cheerful holiday decorations, and felt something cold and hard settle irrevocably in my chest. Martha had always been the diplomatic one, the only one who smoothed over family conflicts with endless patience and profound understanding. But Martha wasn't here anymore, and diplomacy hadn't protected my beloved grandson from 4 grueling hours in near-freezing weather. Let me worry about Wilbur, I said, firmly opening the truck door. Right now, we're going to go and get your things. I stepped out into the snow, my heavy boots loudly crunching on the accumulating white. Behind me, I heard Amos scramble to quickly follow, my coat still securely wrapped around his shivering shoulders. The front door was still completely locked, but I had no intention of knocking politely. I held Amos closer, but my hands weren't just violently shaking from the bitter cold anymore. They were shaking fiercely with the kind of intense rage that builds slowly, then hits like an inevitable freight train when you finally see the whole devastating picture. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I asked, studying his face more carefully. Now that I was really looking, I could clearly see faint bruises along his jawline, partially hidden by the shadows and cold reddened skin. I tried to hint, he whispered, pulling my coat even tighter. But you always talk to Mom, and she. The memory hit me like a physical slap. Just last month when Amos had called while I was fixing dinner. His voice small and uncertain. Grandpa, Wilbur says I can't eat dinner with him anymore. He says I have to earn my way back to the table. I had foolishly laughed it off. Thought it was just typical teenage drama. Called Leona the very next day, and she'd brushed it aside with that practiced weary ease she'd developed since marrying Wilbur. Dad, you're totally overreacting. It's just normal family discipline. Amos exaggerates everything. You know how teenagers are? Another memory surfaced. A quick summer phone call. Amos sounding completely exhausted. Mom, Wilbur yelled at me again about leaving dishes in the sink. He made me wash every single dish in the house twice. When I'd asked Leona about it later, she'd sighed that martyred sigh. He's just being overly dramatic. Wilbur's trying to teach him responsibility. How long has he been treating you like this? I asked, though a painful part of me already knew the inevitable answer would completely destroy me. Since Mom married him 3 years ago. Alma's voice was barely audible. It started small, making me redo chores if they weren't absolutely perfect. Then it steadily got worse. I remembered the fishing trip this past summer, how Amos had seemed strangely reluctant to go home. Kept anxiously asking if we could stay another day. When I pressed him hard about it, he just shrugged vaguely and said he truly liked being on the lake. But now I could see it all entirely differently. The way he'd grown utterly quiet when I mentioned driving him back. The distinct shadow that crossed his face when he talked about school starting. The basement incident, I said. The terrible pieces clicking together now. You mentioned sleeping in the garage. How many times? More than I want to count, Grandpa. He was looking down at his hands now, and I could clearly see the deep shame he carried. Last winter, he actually locked me out for forgetting to shovel the driveway. I slept in your truck when you visited for Christmas Eve. My truck. He'd slept right in my truck on Christmas Eve while I was inside and enjoying delicious eggnog and mistakenly thinking what a wonderful family holiday we were genuinely having. The immense guilt hit me like a violent physical blow. I looked toward the large house where warm light spilled from every single window, and I could hear the faint, sickening sound of laughter. A perfect suburban holiday scene while my grandson nearly froze to death on the front steps. Your mother knows about all of this. Amos nodded miserably. She says Wilbur's just trying to make me a better person, that I need to stop being so sensitive and learn to precisely follow rules. The intense rage was building now, hot and sharply focused. I could clearly feel it in my chest and the specific way my vision seemed to sharpen and narrow. Martha used to faithfully warn me about my terrible temper. Told me to count to 10 slowly before acting when I got like this. But Martha wasn't here anymore, and counting wouldn't effectively help my grandson. I stood up tall, still keeping Amos securely wrapped in my coat. Come on, we're going inside right now. Grandpa, no. Please. If you make a scene, he'll just ... He'll just what? I turned to face him fully. Make you sleep outside in freezing weather. Beat you. Starve you? I could clearly hear my voice getting harder and louder. Son, it genuinely can't get much worse than what's already happening to you. Amos looked intensely toward the front door with abject fear in his eyes. You don't understand how he gets when someone challenges him. But I was already walking purposefully toward the house, my grandson following reluctantly behind me. The front door looked solid and expensive, Wilbur's pride showing clearly in every detail of his perfect suburban fortress. I didn't bother knocking at all. My heavy boot hit the door just beside the lock with all the considerable force I could muster. 68 years old, but long decades of factory work had left me with more surprising strength than most men half my age. The hardwood splintered with a loud crack that echoed throughout the entire neighborhood, and the door slammed open so hard it physically bounced off the interior wall. The warm air rushed out immediately to meet us, carrying the overwhelming smell of roasted turkey and the sound of utterly shocked silence. I stepped into the entryway, Amos close behind me, and took in the scene that stopped me cold. The dining room table was meticulously set like something lifted from a glossy magazine. White, clean tablecloth, candles flickering softly, crystal glasses catching the light beautifully. Wilbur sat at the head of the table in a crisply pressed button-down shirt, a carving knife in his hand. Leona was seated beside him in a green dress I'd never seen before, her stylish hair perfectly styled. A younger girl, maybe 10 years old, sat across from them with a fork full of mashed potatoes halfway to her mouth. They were all completely frozen mid-motion, like someone had abruptly hit pause on their perfect holiday moment. The stark contrast hit me like a violent physical blow. Here they sat, incredibly warm and completely comfortable, enjoying their massive feast, while Amos had been shivering outside for over 4 excruciating hours. The turkey looked golden and truly beautiful, probably the replacement for the one Amos had supposedly ruined. Everything was pristine, peaceful, exactly what a family Thanksgiving should realistically look like. Everything except the undeniable fact that they'd left a vulnerable child outside to freeze. Have you completely lost your minds? My voice boomed powerfully through the entire room, and the little girl instantly dropped her fork with a loud clatter. Leona's face went white as paper, and the serving spoon in her hand hit the table, instantly sending gravy spattering across the white cloth. Dad? Leona's voice came out as a shocked squeak. What are you doing here? How did you... While you're sitting here feasting like royalty, that poor boy was freezing outside. I pointed directly and accusingly at Amos, who was still securely wrapped in my coat and shivering despite the warm indoor air. 4 hours, Leona. 4 long hours in weather that could have easily killed him. Wilbur slowly set down his carving knife and deliberately rose from his chair. He was bigger than I vividly remembered. probably outweighed me by 50 pounds, but I'd been in my fair share of real fights when I was much younger. Size didn't always matter when you were angry enough and absolutely justified. Who gave you explicit permission to enter my house? His voice was carefully controlled, but undeniably dangerous. The specific tone of a man who wasn't used to ever being challenged. This is private property, and you're trespassing illegally. I could see him taking my exact measure, calculating carefully whether he could easily intimidate me into backing down. His chest puffed out slightly, and he moved around the table toward us with the predatory confidence of someone who ruthlessly ruled his own domain. Private property? I stepped forward deliberately to meet him. You mean the property where you locked my only grandson outside to freeze while you selfishly ate dinner? The younger daughter started crying loudly, confused and frightened by the shouting. Leona reached nervously over to comfort her, but her eyes never entirely left my angry face. I could clearly see the deep conflict there, torn between protecting her own father and staunchly defending her cruel husband. This is a private internal family matter, Wilbur said, his voice rising in pitch. And you have no business, double quotes, no business. I could clearly feel the heat rising intensely in my face. That's my grandson you nearly killed with your private family matter. Behind me, Amos pressed even closer, and I could physically feel him trembling, not just from the residual cold now, but from sheer fear of what was about to happen next. This was probably the very first time anyone had ever forcefully stood up to Wilbur in his very own house. And we all instinctively knew it was about to get extremely ugly. The holiday music was still playing softly in the background. Some sickeningly cheerful song about gratitude and fake family togetherness. The intense irony would have been funny if I weren't so furious I could barely see straight. I pointed directly and accusingly at Amos, my fingers steady despite the extreme rage coursing through me. Look at him, Wilbur. Really look hard at what you've done. Wilbur crossed his large arms and lifted his chin arrogantly. Every inch the man who truly believed he was completely justified in his vile actions. The boy ruined our entire holiday. He absolutely needed to learn a crucial lesson about responsibility and consequences. A lesson? I could barely believe what I was hearing from him. You nearly froze a child to death over a slightly burnt turkey. He's 18, not a helpless child. And this is my house with my absolute rules. Wilbur's voice took on that sickening, patronizing tone men often use when they smugly think they're being reasonable. I'm merely trying to teach him proper discipline, something his mother obviously completely failed to do in his first 17 years of life. Leona flinched visibly at that cruel comment, but didn't say anything at all. Just sat there in her fancy green dress, looking passively between us, like she was watching a boring tennis match, instead of a desperate fight for her own son's welfare. Discipline. I stepped closer deliberately to the table, close enough to clearly see the grease on Wilbur's dinner plate, the red wine stain on his smug lips. That's called child abuse, plain and simple, and you're lucky I don't call the police right now. Child abuse? Wilbur actually laughed loudly, a cold, hollow sound that made my skin crawl terribly. He forgot to turn off a kitchen timer and ruined a $20 turkey. I simply sat outside to think about his irresponsible actions. That's not abuse. That's responsible parenting. For 4 grueling hours in 5-degree weather, he's being overly dramatic just like always. Wilbur waved his hand dismissively like he was. Shooing away an annoying fly? Look at him. He's fine. A little cold never truly hurt anyone. I looked at Amos, still securely wrapped in my coat. His lips blue and his whole body shaking violently. Fine. This narcissistic man thought hypothermia was completely fine. Dad, please. Leona finally spoke up, her voice shaky and weak. Don't completely ruin our holiday. We can discuss this important matter later as a family. Ruin your holiday? I turned sharply to stare directly at my daughter. Your own son was sitting outside freezing while you happily ate dinner, and you're worried about me ruining your holiday? She looked quickly down at her plate, unable to meet my angry eyes. Wilbur was just... He was truly trying to teach Amos responsibility. Sometimes boys simply need firm guidance. Firm guidance? My voice cracked with disbelief. Leona, when you were 18 and you dented my truck, did I lock you outside in a blizzard? When you failed your math test, did I make you sleep in the garage? That's completely different, she whispered defensively. How? How is it possibly different? Wilbur stepped between us aggressively, his face bright red with intense anger. Because this is my house, and Amos is not my biological son. I have every single right to discipline him as I see absolutely fit. There it was finally, the awful truth out in the open for everyone to hear. Amos wasn't his blood, so Amos simply didn't matter to him. The boy was nothing more than utter inconvenience to be controlled, tormented, and brutally punished. You have precisely 30 seconds to genuinely apologize to my grandson, I said, my voice deadly quiet. 30 seconds to show some basic human decency. Wilbur's laugh was even colder and more menacing this time. I don't owe that boy anything at all. If he doesn't like my strict rules, he can simply find somewhere else to live. The little girl was crying harder now, and Leona was making weak shushing noises, but I could barely hear them over the ringing silence. All I could clearly see was Wilbur's smug, hateful face. All I could think about constantly was Amos sitting on those steps for 4 agonizing hours, mistakenly believing he deserved it all. Somewhere else to live. I stepped even closer, close enough to clearly smell the wine on Wilbur's heavy breath. You were right about that, I declared. He's going somewhere else to live. I reached quickly into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone, my thumb hovering intentionally over the keypad. The movement was deliberate, slow enough for everyone in the tense room to fully understand exactly what terrifying action I was considering. Wilbur's face visibly changed when he saw the phone. The smug confidence cracked just slightly around the edges of his mouth. Either you sincerely apologize to my grandson right now, I said, my voice deadly calm, or I call Child Protective Services immediately and report this systemic abuse. You wouldn't dare? Wilbur stepped closer, trying forcefully to use his size to intimidate me. But I'd faced down much bigger men than him in my life, and I wasn't backing down from anyone who cruelly hurt my family. Try me. I started dialing the first emergency number. I've got plenty of damning evidence to tell them about leaving an 18-year-old outside in freezing weather for 4 hours. Behind me, Amos gripped my arm tightly. I could physically feel him trembling, but not from the cold anymore. This was fear of a completely different kind. The terror of someone who'd painfully learned that standing up only made things drastically worse. Dad, please. Leona finally moved, stepping desperately between us with her hands raised like she was trying to stop a violent bar fight. Don't destroy our entire family over this one incident. I'm not destroying anything. I kept my eyes locked fiercely on Wilbur. He did that when he decided to brutally abuse my grandson. Abuse? Wilbur's harsh laugh was bitter and sharp. I was merely teaching him responsibility, something his weak mother never bothered to properly do. Leona flinched like he'd brutally slapped her. But she didn't defend herself at all. Just stood there taking the verbal abuse the specific way she probably always did. Get out of my house, old man. Wilbur continued yelling, his voice steadily rising. You have absolutely no authority here. Amos is my responsibility now. Your responsibility. I looked around the perfect dining room, the crystal glasses, the fine china, the gaudy holiday centerpiece, then looked back at my grandson's bruised, pale face. Is this how you handle responsibility? Locking vulnerable children outside to freeze? The younger daughter was crying harder now, confused and thoroughly frightened by the shouting. Leona moved to comfort her, but kept anxiously glancing between me and Wilbur like she was watching a tennis match where someone might imminently die. He's not a child. He's 18, Wilbur said, straightening his broad shoulders. And in my house, adults who clearly can't follow simple instructions face adult consequences. Adult consequences for forgetting to turn off a timer. Adult consequences for being careless and destructive. For ruining our important holiday and embarrassing the family in front of our esteemed guests. Wilbur gestured widely. toward the empty chairs where other family members had obviously been sitting before I violently arrived. Everyone had to leave because of the massive scene he caused. I looked at those empty, cold chairs and felt another piece of the terrible puzzle click firmly into place. They'd had guests. Other people had been sitting here eating dinner and socializing while Amos sat outside freezing. And none of them had questioned it at all. None of them had said a single word. "Grandpa, let's just quietly go," Amos whispered behind me. "Please, I sincerely don't want to cause any more serious problems." The deep defeat in his broken voice broke something inside me. This boy, this smart, kind young man, had been beaten down so thoroughly that he actually thought he was the problem, that he was the one causing trouble by simply asking for basic human decency. "You're not causing problems, son," I said loud enough for everyone in the room to clearly hear. "You never were." I turned back to face Wilbur squarely, my decision crystallizing quickly like ice in my veins. "You have precisely 30 seconds to genuinely apologize to my grandson for what you did today." "I am not apologizing for anything." Wilbur crossed his arms tightly, chin raised in clear defiance. "And I'm certainly not taking orders from some bitter, judgmental old man who can't accept that his precious grandson needed discipline. Then we're done here. Permanently." I closed the phone and resolutely put it back in my pocket. "Amos, go get your things now. You're coming home with me." The deafening silence that followed was total. Even the little girl stopped crying for a brief moment. "You can't just forcefully take him," Leona said, her voice barely a whisper. "Watch me." I placed my hand firmly on Amos' shoulder, gently guiding him away from the dining room table and toward the main stairs. "Go pack whatever you desperately need. We're leaving immediately." "Dad, you absolutely can't do this." Leona followed us anxiously, her voice rising with panic. "You can't just walk into our house and take my son." "I can, and I am doing it." I kept walking, resolutely staying between Amos and the rest of the family. "Unless you'd much prefer I call the authorities myself and let them sort it out legally." Amos led the way up the narrow, creaking staircase to the second floor, his steps quick and uncertain. I could clearly hear Wilbur behind us, his heavy footsteps pounding on the hardwood, but I didn't bother to turn around. "This is kidnapping," Wilbur loudly called out. "I'll have you arrested immediately for kidnapping." Good luck explaining honestly to the police why my grandson was sitting outside in 5-degree weather for 4 hours. I reached the top of the stairs and quickly followed Amos down a short, dim hallway to a small room at the back of the large house. The room was barely large enough for a twin bed and a small worn dresser, no heat vent that I could clearly see, and the single window faced north, letting in the coldest air. It looked much more like a storage room than a comfortable bedroom, and it was clearly the worst room in the entire house. "This is where you sleep?" I asked, taking in the sparse furnishings and bare walls. Amos nodded silently, already pulling clothes from the dresser and stuffing them haphazardly into a duffel bag. "Wilbur says the basement room is reserved for guests, and the other upstairs room is for my sister." I noticed he didn't call her our sister, just my sister. Even in his very own home, he was clearly treated as an outsider. "Take everything that genuinely matters to you," I said, resolutely standing guard at the doorway while he frantically packed. "We're not coming back for anything at all. Amos, think seriously about what you're doing." Leona appeared quickly in the doorway, her face streaked with fresh tears. "This is your home, your family?" "Some family," Amos muttered darkly, folding a Dayton University sweatshirt into his bag. "Real families don't lock each other outside to freeze. Wilbur was just trying to teach you responsibility by giving me hypothermia." Amos looked up at his mother, and I could clearly see 3 years of intense hurt and disappointment in his young eyes. "Mom, he made me sleep in the garage last week because I left a simple glass in the sink." "A glass? That's definitely not normal." Leona's face crumpled sadly. He has very high standards. He genuinely wants you to be better." "He wants me gone," Amos said, quietly and firmly, zipping up his bag. "And you know it deep down." We made our way back downstairs, Wilbur waiting ominously at the bottom like a furious bouncer. You leave my house now, boy, and you don't come back ever again. Fine by me, Amos said, and I heard real strength in his voice for the very first time all day. The front door was still hanging wide open from when I'd kicked it in. Cold, frigid air pouring into the house and making the festive holiday decorations flutter, sadly like dying leaves. I could clearly see my truck in the driveway, engine still running, exhaust visible clearly in the frigid air. Leona called out tearfully as we reached the damaged door. Please don't do this. I love you. He stopped, turned back to look at his mother one last time. If you truly loved me, Mom, you wouldn't have let this happen for so long. We walked quickly to my truck in silence, our breath visible in the cold, freezing air. I threw his bag in the truck bed and quickly helped him into the warm passenger seat, then walked around to the driver's side. Through the front window of the house, I could clearly see the family still standing in the entryway. Leona crying profusely, Wilbur, bright red-faced with intense rage, the little girl peeking nervously around the corner. You ready to go? I asked, putting the truck into reverse. I've been ready for 3 years, Grandpa, Amos said, pulling my coat tighter around his shoulders. I'd backed out of the driveway and onto the street, past the other cheerfully decorated houses where normal. Loving families were probably just finishing their peaceful Thanksgiving dinners. The radio was still playing classic rock music. The heater was working perfectly now. And for the very first time since I'd arrived, Amos looked like he could actually deeply breathe. Thank you, Grandpa, he said quietly as we turned onto the main road toward the highway. I truly can't believe you came for me. I should have come sooner, I said honestly, meaning every single word. I should have clearly seen what was happening to you. I tried to tell you, but I just didn't know exactly how. We drove in comfortable, profound silence for a few minutes, the familiar heavy weight of family responsibility settling securely around my shoulders like Martha's favorite quilt. This boy desperately needed protection, needed a safe place to fully heal and finally grow into the confident man he was meant to become. Tell me about college, I said as we merged smoothly onto I-75 North. What are you seriously studying? Engineering. His voice got stronger and clearer when he proudly talked about school. Mechanical engineering like you used to do at the factory. Like grandfather? Like grandson? I smiled warmly, thinking about Martha and how incredibly proud she would have been of him. We'll figure out the tuition. Don't you worry about that at all. Grandpa, I truly don't want to be a burden on you. Son, you're not a burden to anyone. You're family, and family takes care of each other without question. My driveway looks smaller than usual, with both trucks comfortably parked side by side. But the house itself seemed to glow warmly with welcome as we approached it. I'd left the porch light on out of old habit, and now I was deeply grateful for that small beacon cutting clearly through the winter darkness. Home, sweet home, I said, quickly helping Amos carry his duffel bag to the front door. The key turned easily in the lock, and warm air rushed out immediately to greet us as we stepped inside. The house smelled wonderfully, like fresh coffee and the lingering scent of Martha's lavender sachets. It wasn't much, just a modest ranch with worn furniture and carpet that had definitely seen better days. But it was completely paid for and it was undeniably ours. You remember where the guest room is located? I asked, quickly flipping on lights as we moved through the living room. Yeah, down the hall next to your room. Amos looked around with obvious, deep relief. It's so wonderfully warm in here. Thermostat set to 72 degrees year-round. Your grandmother always wisely said life was simply too short to be cold in your own house. I showed him to the guest room and helped him get comfortably settled. There are extra thick blankets in the closet if you need them. The room was simple but incredibly comfortable. A double bed with one of Martha's handmade quilts, a dresser, and a reading chair by the window. Photos of past family gatherings lined the walls, including several of Amos at various younger ages. This had always been his room when he visited, and seeing him here now felt right in a specific way that nothing had felt right since Martha died. I'll get some dinner started right away, I said. Nothing fancy. I've got chicken in the freezer and some vegetables that seriously need using up. Can I help you? He asked immediately, and I could clearly see how desperately he wanted to be useful, to earn his keep. Sure, but you absolutely don't have to. This is your home now, not a job. We worked together comfortably in the kitchen, and gradually the day's intense tension began to leave Amos' shoulders entirely. I thawed the chicken in the microwave while he meticulously washed vegetables, and we moved around each other with the easy, natural rhythm of family members who'd cooked together many times before. Tell me more about what's really been happening lately, I said as I seasoned the chicken. Start right from the very beginning when your mother first married Wilbur. Amos was quiet for a long, reflective moment, clearly trying to decide exactly how much detail to share. It started small. Little comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong or left my shoes in the wrong place. Then it got steadily bigger. How much bigger exactly? He controls everything I do. When I eat, what I eat, when I can shower, when I can use the phone. Amos's voice got smaller as he bravely continued. He made Mom choose severely between him and me, and she chose him. I had to stop seasoning the chicken for a moment and firmly grip the counter. What do you mean she chose him? Last Christmas, when you visited, remember how I was unusually quiet during dinner? Wilbur had explicitly told me I wasn't allowed to speak unless someone asked me a direct question, and Mom didn't say anything at all to stop him. The terrible memory hit me like a sudden punch to the gut. I thought Amos was just being a typical, moody teenager. I'd even joked with Martha about it later, saying kids these days didn't know how to properly make conversation. Why doesn't your mother stand up to him fiercely? She's terrified, Grandpa. Amos started chopping carrots with mechanical precision. She told me once that if she leaves him, she'll lose the house and have to move back to that terrible apartment complex where we used to live. She simply can't afford to take care of us completely on her own. I slid the seasoned chicken into the oven and started a warm fire in the living room fireplace. The familiar, comforting ritual of wadding newspaper and stacking kindling helped momentarily calm my racing thoughts. Come sit here with me, I said when the fire was crackling steadily. Tell me about the good things happening. Tell me about school, about your good friends. We settled into the comfortable chairs by the fire, and for the very first time all day, Amos genuinely smiled. I made Dean's List last semester, and I've got this friend, Jake, who's diligently teaching me to play the guitar. Your grandmother always desperately wanted to learn guitar. I pointed to a framed photo on the mantel showing Martha at age 20, laughing and happily holding an acoustic guitar. She said music was the language of the soul. I remember her wisely saying that. Amos studied the photo with new, focused interest. I deeply miss her. Me too, son. Me too. We talked quietly until the chicken was done, sharing memories of Martha and making important plans for Amos's spring semester. The house felt alive again with comfortable conversation and laughter, the exact way it used to when Martha was here to naturally fill the quiet spaces. As we sat down to eat our simple but incredibly satisfying meal, I looked across the table at my grandson. Really looked hard at him. The fear was entirely gone from his eyes, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine hope. We'll call the college tomorrow morning, I said, cutting into my chicken. Make sure your financial aid is properly sorted out. And we'll look into getting you a part-time job if you truly want one. Grandpa, you really don't have to do all this for me. Yes, I absolutely do it. I met his eyes across the table. That's what family's for, period. The phone rang just as we were finishing dessert. Leftover pie I'd found in the freezer. The loud sound cut through our peaceful evening like a sharp knife, and I could see Amos tense up immediately. I looked at the caller ID and felt my jaw clench tightly. Leona, the peaceful crackling of the fireplace was suddenly shattered by 3 sharp, authoritative knocks on the front door, not the gentle tapping of a neighbor, or the hesitant tap of someone unsure. This was the authoritative pounding of someone who expected immediate total compliance. Amos nearly dropped his coffee mug. Grandpa, stay behind me, I said, setting down my own cup and moving purposefully toward the door. The knocking came more insistent this time, accompanied by the muffled sound of multiple voices on my front porch. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. Two uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, and behind them, like vicious predators waiting for their moment to strike, were Wilbur and Leona. "Mr. Burke?" the lead officer called out loudly. "Police, we need to speak with you urgently." I took a deep, steady breath and opened the door slowly, keeping my body positioned to firmly block their view of Amos. "What can I do for you, officers?" Wilbur immediately stepped forward aggressively, pointing an accusatory finger directly at me. "Officer, this man violently kidnapped my stepson. He broke into our house and took the boy without our permission." The lead officer, a middle-aged man with tired, weary eyes, held up his hand to quietly stop Wilbur. "Sir, we need to calmly sort out this whole situation. Mr. Burke, is there a young man named Amos Green on these premises right now?" "Yes," I said simply. "My grandson is securely here. He kidnapped him." Wilbur's voice rose dramatically in pitch. "Broke down our front door like some kind of crazed criminal and dragged the boy away from his own family." "Is the young man here completely voluntarily?" the second officer asked, pulling out a small notepad. Before I could answer, Amos appeared quickly beside me, still wrapped in the blanket from the couch. His voice was quiet but undeniably clear. "I want to stay with my grandpa." Wilbur's face flushed bright red. "See? He's been filling the boy's head with vicious lies, turning him against his own loving family." "What lies?" I stepped forward slightly. "The plain truth about how you left him outside in freezing weather for 4 hours. The damning truth about how you've been systematically abusing him for 3 long years." "Abuse?" Wilbur laughed coldly, but it sounded forced and brittle. "I was merely teaching him responsibility. The boy ruined our entire Thanksgiving dinner and needed to learn their severe consequences for his actions." The first officer looked between us with the weary expression of someone who'd broken up too many family disputes. "Mr. Burke, we're going to need everyone to please come inside so we can discuss this properly and calmly." I stepped back reluctantly, allowing the officers to enter my living room. Wilbur followed immediately, Leona trailing sadly behind him with her eyes fixed nervously on the floor. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a woman who'd finally realized the true, terrible cost of the choices she'd made. "Now then," the officer said, taking out his notepad, "let's start right from the beginning. Mr. Green, you claim this man kidnapped your stepson?" "Absolutely." Wilbur straightened his shoulders stiffly, putting on what I clearly recognized as his reasonable authority figure performance. "I came home from work to find my front door broken and Amos gone. When I called around, neighbors said they saw an older man forcing the boy into a truck. Forcing. I couldn't keep the sheer disbelief out of my voice. "Officer, I rescued my grandson from child abuse." "That's what I keep saying over and over," Wilbur said, shaking his head sadly. "But the simple truth is he's never approved of my marriage to his daughter. He's been looking for any small excuse to cause trouble for us." The officer turned to Amos, who was standing close enough to me that I could physically feel him trembling slightly. "Son, did this man forcefully make you come with him?" "No, sir." Amos's voice was barely above a whisper. "He saved me." "Saved you from what exactly?" Amos glanced nervously at Wilbur, then back at the officer. "From freezing to death on the front porch." The second officer looked up from his notepad. "Explain that in detail." "I accidentally burned the turkey this morning." Wilbur made me sit outside in the cold to think about my actions. I was out there for over 4 hours in 5-degree weather. "He's exaggerating wildly," Wilbur said quickly. "It was maybe an hour, and he was dressed warmly enough." "An hour?" I stared at him intensely. "Officer, I have witnesses. My grandson was sitting on that porch in a thin shirt and jeans when I arrived, 3:15. He'd been there since 11 in the morning." The first officer looked at Wilbur with new, focused interest. "Sir, is it true you made the young man sit outside as punishment?" "Briefly, yes," Wilbur admitted. But he's making it sound much worse than it actually was, in freezing weather for several hours. Wilbur's confident facade began to visibly crack slightly. Look, sometimes teenagers urgently need firm discipline. His mother and I agreed that double quotes. Mom didn't agree to anything. Amos said, his voice getting stronger. She just didn't stop you at all? All eyes turned to Leona, who had been completely silent throughout the entire exchange. She stood by the doorway like she was physically ready to run, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Ma'am, the officer gently prompted. What's your specific version of events? Leona looked like a woman standing precariously at the edge of a steep cliff, knowing that whatever she said next would severely determine whether she stepped back to safety or plunged into the abyss below. Her hand shook violently as she glanced between Wilbur's expectant face and Amos's hopeful eyes. Mrs. Green, the first officer said gently, we urgently need to know what really happened today. Wilbur moved aggressively closer to his wife, and I could clearly see the subtle intimidation in his posture. The specific way he positioned himself to loom menacingly over her, the dark warning look in his eyes. Tell them, honey. Tell them how your father has been actively poisoning Amos against our family. The officer noticed it, too. Sir, please step back immediately and let your wife speak for herself. Leona's voice came out as barely a whisper. She quickly cleared her throat and tried again. Amos did unfortunately burn the turkey this morning, and ... The officer prompted her patiently. And Wilbur was severely upset, very, very upset. Her eyes darted nervously to her husband, then quickly away. He said Amos needed to learn responsibility by sitting outside in freezing weather. Leona nodded sadly and miserably. Wilbur said it would teach him to be much more careful. How long was he outside, ma'am? Another fearful glance at Wilbur, who was standing rigid with barely controlled anger. Since around 11 this morning. Until when? Until my father arrived. Her voice was getting smaller with each word. Around 3:15. The officer did quick mental math in his head. Over 4 hours in 5-degree weather? She's clearly making it sound much worse than it was, Wilbur interjected loudly. He could have come inside any time if he'd sincerely apologized and shown some genuine remorse. No, he definitely couldn't, Leona said suddenly, and everyone turned to stare at her in shock. You locked the front door. You explicitly told me not to let him in no matter what I thought. The silence that followed her statement was absolutely deafening. Wilbur's face went white, then red, then back to ghostly white. Leona, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What exactly are you doing right now? I'm telling the truth for once. She looked directly at Amos, and I could clearly see tears starting to form in her eyes. For once in 3 long years, I'm telling the complete truth. The officer leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Green, has this specific kind of cruel punishment happened before? Yes. The word came out in a sudden rush, like she'd been desperately holding it back for years. He's made Amos sleep in the cold garage, in the dark basement. He's locked him out of the house overnight repeatedly. Her voice grew stronger with each painful confession. He controls when Amos can eat, when he can shower, when he can even speak at the dinner table. Leona, shut up right now. Wilbur's vicious mask finally slipped completely. You have no idea what terrible thing you're doing. You'll destroy everything we've built together. What we've built. She turned on him with sudden, fierce fury. What exactly have we built except fear and misery? Look at my son right now. Look what you've cruelly done to him. I watched Amos's face completely transform as his mother finally stood up for him. 3 long years of doubt and self-blame seemed to entirely melt away as he realized that someone else could clearly see the painful truth of what he had endured. The first officer stood up and moved purposefully toward Wilbur. Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back immediately. This is absolutely ridiculous. Wilbur backed defensively toward the door. You're going to arrest me based on the word of a bitter old man and his delusional, hysterical daughter? Based on the physical evidence clearly present and multiple corroborating testimonies about child endangerment, the officer said calmly, pulling out his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As they read Wilbur his Miranda rights and firmly led him toward the front door, he turned back to Leona with pure, unadulterated venom in his eyes. You'll deeply regret this betrayal. You'll lose everything important. The house, the money, everything you value. It'll be absolutely nothing without me. I'd rather be nothing than watch you hurt my son ever again, she said. And for the first time in years, she sounded like the strong, determined woman who'd raised Amos on her own. The door closed firmly behind the officers and their prisoner, leaving the three of us alone in my quiet living room. Leona collapsed into a nearby chair and started crying uncontrollably. Not the quiet, careful tears she'd shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to truly come from years of buried pain and guilt. Amos went to her immediately, kneeling gently beside her chair. Mom, it's truly okay. It's completely over now. I'm so incredibly sorry, she whispered through her tears. I should have protected you fiercely. I should have been much stronger for you. You were strong tonight, Leona, I said, settling back into my chair by the comforting fireplace. When it mattered most decisively, you chose your son over your husband. That took real, profound courage. The fire crackled peacefully in the grate, and for the very first time in months, my house felt like a real home again. Not just because my family was physically safe, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud, and justice was finally being served. Amos looked up at me from where he knelt beside his mother's chair. What happens now, Grandpa? Now we heal, I said simply. We take our time, and we heal together. 4 months later, the morning sun streamed brightly through my kitchen window, as Leona expertly flipped pancakes on the griddle. And Amos sat at the table, eagerly reviewing his official acceptance letter from Ohio State's prestigious engineering program. Full scholarship, he said for the 10th time that week, still not quite believing his fantastic luck. They're actually paying me to go to school. That's what precisely happens when you're brilliant and work extremely hard, Leona said proudly, sliding a tall stack of pancakes onto his plate. She looked noticeably different now, stronger, much more confident and composed. The part-time job at the local library had given her the vital independence she'd never had before, and the fair divorce settlement had provided enough initial money for her to confidently start over. Your grandmother would have been so proud of your accomplishment, I said, settling into my chair with my hot coffee. The kitchen felt alive in a way it hadn't since Martha died, full of meaningful conversation and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a real family being together. Leona had moved in permanently after Wilbur's conviction. The guest room had become her personal space, and we'd converted the basement into a proper, warm bedroom for Amos, not a punishment cell like at Wilbur's house, but a comfortable, private retreat with good heating and windows that actually opened wide. Dad, are you absolutely sure you don't mind us staying here indefinitely? Leona asked nervously, joining us at the table. I know you're very used to your personal independence. Independence is seriously overrated, I said, meaning every word sincerely. Family is what truly matters. Besides, who else is going to make sure Amos doesn't accidentally burn down the kitchen when he tries to cook for us? That was only one time, Dad. Amos protested, laughing happily, and the fire was very small. The phone rang just as we were finishing our delicious breakfast. The sound cut through our peaceful morning like a sudden alarm, and I could see Amos tense up immediately. I looked at the caller ID and felt my jaw clench. Leona. The peaceful crackling of the fireplace was suddenly shattered by 3 sharp knocks on the front door, not the gentle rapping of a neighbor or the hesitant tap of someone unsure. This was the authoritative pounding of someone who expected immediate compliance. Amos nearly dropped his coffee mug. Grandpa, stay behind me, I said, setting down my own cup and moving toward the door. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by the sound of multiple voices on my front porch. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. Two uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, and behind them, like predators waiting for their moment to strike, were Wilbur and Leona. The final sentence in that paragraph was mistakenly repeated from earlier, which I will now correct and change slightly. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. Two uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, and behind them, I could see the faces of Wilbur and Leona. The phone rang again, and Leona answered it. Burke residence. Oh, hi, Jake. Yes, he's here. Guitar practice at 4? Sure, I'll tell him. She hung up and turned to us. Your friend Jake urgently wants to know if you're still planning to practice for the upcoming talent show. The talent show? I raised an eyebrow in surprise. You didn't tell me about any talent show. Amos grinned widely, looking more like the confident, healthy young man he was supposed to be. It's nothing too big. Jake and I are doing an acoustic set. A couple of classic rock songs you'd probably instantly recognize. I'll be right in the front row, I promised enthusiastically. After breakfast, I found Leona in the living room carefully arranging new, happier family photos on the mantel alongside the cherished pictures of Martha. There was one from Amos high school graduation that we tragically missed because of the awful Wilbur situation. One from our successful fishing trip last month. And one from Christmas morning, our first real family Christmas in many years. Any word from Wilbur recently? I asked quietly, though I wasn't entirely sure I truly wanted to know. His lawyer called yesterday. The required anger management therapy is going well apparently, but he completely lost his job at the local supermarket. She shrugged indifferently, not looking particularly sympathetic at all. He's moving back to Cleveland to live with his estranged sister. Good. The farther away from us, the better I feel. I feel sorry for him sometimes, I must admit, she admitted softly. But then I instantly remember what he cruelly did to Amos. And the feeling passes pretty quickly. That very afternoon, while Amos was at guitar practice, Leona and I diligently worked in the garden, preparing the rich soil for Martha's beloved vegetable patch. Spring was definitely coming early this year, and there was something truly hopeful about planting new seeds and planning for future growth. Dad, Leona said thoughtfully, pulling weeds with focused determination. I urgently need to thank you again for what you did that Thanksgiving Day. If you hadn't come, then ... You don't need to thank me continually, I said, turning over a stubborn clump of earth. I was just doing what any loving grandfather would do to protect his own. No, you certainly weren't. You risked everything you had to save him. You could have been seriously arrested, charged with kidnapping. But I wasn't arrested. The truth has a special way of winning out in the end, finally. She smiled genuinely, wiping the dirt from her hands. Martha used to always say that. She was a smart, wise woman, much smarter than me anyway. That evening, we comfortably settled into our new routine. Dinner together, followed by whatever boring game show or movie happened to be on the old television. It wasn't particularly exciting or glamorous, but it was exactly what we all desperately needed. Predictable, peaceful, and absolutely safe. Amos had his guitar out, quietly practicing in the corner, while Leona worked on a challenging crossword puzzle, and I read the newspaper. Normal family activities that had seemed completely impossible just a few short months ago. Grandpa, Amos said during a commercial break, I've been seriously thinking about changing my major. From engineering to what exactly? Social work, maybe counseling. He sat down his guitar and looked at me seriously. I want to help other kids who are going through the same ordeal I went through. I felt a surge of pure pride so strong it almost physically took my breath away. This young man who had every right to be bitter and justifiably angry wanted to use his terrible experience to actively help others. That's a fine, honorable goal, son, I said warmly. Your grandmother always wisely said the very best way to heal from pain is to help others effectively avoid it. Can't wait at all. Think we'll catch anything bigger than last year's haul. With your luck, you'll probably catch a giant whale. We stood in comfortable, profound silence. Two generations of Berkman who'd found their healing way back to each other through crisis, honesty, and truth. In a few short months, Amos would head off to college, and eventually he'd build his own life and a loving family. But the foundation was completely solid now, built on honesty, protection, and the kind of unconditional love that doesn't ask for anything at all in return. Grandpa, Amos said as we headed back inside. Yeah, thank you for bravely coming to get me. Thank you for being truly worth saving. The house was warm and bright as we locked up for the night. Three people who'd profoundly learned that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about showing up when it truly matters most, telling the difficult truth even when it's hard, and actively protecting the people you love dearly, no matter what the ultimate cost may be. Martha would have been incredibly proud of all of us today. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share your impressions of this emotional story in the comments section below. To listen to the next compelling story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.